On the night the alert status changed, this stopped being a story about another exchange of missiles over the Middle East and became a story about lift capacity, sortie tempo, and how fast the United States could turn raw warning into organized force. What mattered was not only the blast pattern over Israel, but the moment buses began moving Marines toward waiting aircraft, forklifts started feeding pallets into open cargo bays, and air crews prepared a transport bridge that could move troops, ammunition, generators, radios, medical gear, and armored vehicles across thousands of miles before the political language had even caught up. That is what makes a C-17 surge so dangerous to ignore. The aircraft can carry up to 102 troops, or 170900 pounds of cargo, across about 2,400 nautical miles, without refueling, and it can do it while operating from austere runways as short as 3,500 feet, which means this is not just an airlift platform, but a machine built to compress time, distance, and uncertainty into combat power. The transcript you sent captures that transformation at ground level, with ramps down, head counts underway, vehicles chained in place, and more flights already cycling behind the first wave. Reuters captured the bigger meaning of this escalation when Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth said, "Our objectives, given directly from our America First president, remain exactly what they were on day one." Then added they were unchanged, on target, and on plan. In other words, once the aircraft start loading at this scale, the signal is no longer caution, it is commitment. The first transport wave begins. The real story is not simply that aircraft are leaving the ground, but what kind of battlefield they can build after landing. A single C-17 has 18 pallet positions, can move 54 ambulatory patients, or 36 litters in evacuation configuration, and is designed to haul everything from ammunition crates and communications shelters to trucks, artillery support equipment, and airfield sustainment gear, which means every sortie is less about moving one unit and more about assembling the skeleton of a larger campaign in pieces that can be recombined on arrival. That matters because combat alert is not measured only by fighters on the runway. It is measured by how fast fuel bladders, spare parts, missile loaders, maintenance teams, security forces, satellite terminals, counter-drone kits, and medical detachments can be pushed into theater before the first burst of attrition begins to slow the pace. Reuters reported on March 18 that Washington was weighing thousands of additional troops for the region as the war entered what officials called a possible new phase, with options ranging from securing traffic through the Strait of Hormuz to protecting critical infrastructure deeper inside the Gulf. That is why the airlift piece cannot be read as background noise. When Hegseth said the mission was to degrade Iran's missile launch capability, defense industry, and navy while keeping Tehran from obtaining a nuclear weapon, he was describing a target set too large for symbolic action and too complex for a one-night strike package. It requires lift, repetition, and the ability to keep sending steel, people, and repair capacity forward, even after the first headlines fade. What matters after the first aircraft lifts off is not the headline, but the package that lands. A C-17 can carry 170900 pounds of cargo across 18 pallet positions, move 102 troops in one lift, or switch to evacuation mode for 36 litter patients and 54 ambulatory patients, which means every arrival can deliver not just men, but fuel systems, missile pallets, generators, communications, shelters, maintenance teams, and the spare parts that keep a forward force alive after the first strike. That is why this kind of alert changes the military equation so quickly. Once transports begin stacking sorties, the United States is no longer signaling presence alone. It is building runway security, ammunition flow, medical depth, and repair capacity in layers. And that is the difference between a symbolic response and a force that can absorb losses and still keep operating across the Gulf. Pete Hegseth made that logic explicit at the Pentagon when he said, "It's laser-focused, it's decisive. Our objectives, given directly from our America First president, remain exactly what they were on day one." He then defined those objectives in blunt terms: destroy missiles, launchers, and Iran's defense industrial base so they cannot rebuild. Destroy their navy, and Iran never gets a nuclear weapon. Once that is the declared target set, a transport surge is no side detail. It is the delivery system for a longer war architecture. Airlift alone does not change the balance unless something is already in place to protect what lands. And that is where the wider architecture starts to matter. By late January, CENTCOM imagery and releases already showed USS Abraham Lincoln operating in the Arabian Sea, while AFCENT announced a readiness exercise to generate combat air power, and the command also highlighted a new regional air defense operations cell in Qatar, which tells you this theater was being prepared as a network, not as a single burst of retaliation. That network is what gives the transport surge meaning. Cargo aircraft can bring in troops, missile crews, radar technicians, base defense teams, and counter-drone equipment. But those assets only become useful if fighters, tankers, command nodes, and air defense systems are already arranged to keep ports, runways, and logistics hubs from being hit faster than they can be replenished. In a Gulf fight measured in minutes, the side that protects the runway usually protects the campaign. Pete Hegseth described that campaign logic in blunt official language when he said the mission was laser-focused, and that the target set was to destroy Iranian offensive missiles, destroy Iranian missile production, destroy their navy, and other security infrastructure. Once that is the stated objective, moving C-17 loads into theater is no longer a precaution. It is the ground floor of a larger strike system being assembled piece by piece. The next layer is protection, because a transport bridge is only as strong as the airfield that receives it. A Patriot battery can field up to 8 launchers tied to a phased array radar, engagement control station, computers, and power units, while AFCENT's Blue Sands 26. One exercise in January was built specifically to strengthen integrated air defense and counter-UAS capability across the region, which means the runway, fuel farm, and cargo yard were never supposed to sit exposed while heavy airlift kept arriving. That is where the logic tightens. If C-17s are carrying 102 troops or 170,900 pounds per sortie, then every landing creates a denser target, unless the defense umbrella grows at the same speed. So the real contest is not just who can move more cargo, but who can keep missile crews, drone teams, and surveillance nodes alive long enough to unload, disperse, and fire back before the next volley arrives. Again, Derek France, commander of 9th Air Force and AFCENT, described the purpose of that readiness cycle in direct terms when he said, "These exercises ensure our airmen and joint partners are ready to respond to threats with speed and precision." That line matters because in a Gulf contingency, speed is not a slogan. It is the difference between an air bridge that compounds combat power and one that turns into a queue of parked aircraft under threat. The pressure does not stop at the runway, because every aircraft that lands is feeding a maritime fight measured across choke points, convoy lanes, and missile arcs. The US 5th Fleet operates across about 5 million square miles of water and covers 3 critical choke points, including the Strait of Hormuz. So once transports begin reinforcing the theater, the cargo is not moving into a static base system, but into a naval battle space where escorts, air defense, surveillance, and resupply all have to function at the same time. That is why the sea lane matters so much in this story. CENTCOM imagery showed USS Roosevelt transiting the Strait of Hormuz in December, while USS Abraham Lincoln was conducting flight operations in support of Operation Epic Fury in March, which signals that the corridor was already being treated as an active operational spine rather than a distant shipping route. In practical terms, every C-17 load of missile parts, security teams, radar gear, or maintenance crews strengthens the naval shield that keeps tankers moving and keeps Gulf bases from fighting alone. Mark Esper explained the principle in plain language when he said, "We need to defend the principle of freedom of navigation." That line remains central here, because once Hormuz becomes the hinge, the fight is no longer only about strikes on land. It becomes a contest over whether the United States and its partners can keep open the waterway that holds together energy flow, fleet movement, and regional deterrence. The next pressure point is sustainment, because a force can surge into theater faster than it can stay lethal there. A C-17 is flown by a crew of 3, cruises at about 450 knots, can airdrop 102 paratroopers, and can haul even a 6.9-ton M1 Abrams or other heavy army equipment through its rear ramp system, which means the aircraft is not just carrying men into danger, it is carrying the tools that let damaged units rearm, refuel, repair, and return to the fight before tempo collapses. That is the part many people miss when they watch a combat alert story unfold. The first lift gets attention, but the second, third, and fourth lifts decide whether batteries stay supplied, whether launchers can be dispersed, whether airfields can recover from strikes, and whether a regional deployment becomes a durable war structure instead of a short burst of movement. With a final C-17 fleet of 223 aircraft in US service, the real advantage is not one dramatic sortie, but repeated capacity. Air Force doctrine says the C-17 is built for the rapid strategic delivery of troops and all types of cargo to main operating bases or directly to forward bases. And that line is exactly why this matters now. In a Gulf fight, sustainment is strategy, because the side that keeps missiles, fuel, parts, and crews moving after the opening shock is usually the side still shaping the battlefield when the first wave of headlines is over. The next layer is coalition depth, because no air bridge stays efficient if every radar picture, tanker track, and port movement depends on one flag doing everything alone. The United States has spent years trying to turn the region into a shared warning network, and the logic is simple. If partners can pass early warning faster, align air defense faster, and widen maritime awareness faster, then every C-17 arrival becomes more valuable because the cargo is entering a battle space that is already being watched from more than one direction. That is why this surge has to be read as regional architecture, not only American motion, the U.S. Fifth Fleet says. It operates across 2.5 million square miles and 3 strategic choke points, while CENTCOM has highlighted partner innovation cells, integrated defense drills, and multinational systems built to thicken surveillance and shorten response time. In a theater like the Gulf, that means one load of missiles, one radar crew, or one airfield repair team can plug into a wider grid instead of standing alone on one exposed base. Colin Carl framed that strategy clearly when he said, "The opportunities to share early warning, integrate air defense capabilities, expand maritime domain awareness could not come at a better time." That sentence matters because once the warning network widens, the transport surge stops being just about lift. It becomes about multiplying the combat value of every aircraft that lands. What raises the stakes now is not only how fast the force can arrive, but how expensive it becomes to keep that force sharp day after day. The Air Force's own C-17 fact sheet says the aircraft was built for the rapid strategic delivery of troops and all types of cargo, and defines the real measure of airlift as the ability to rapidly project and sustain an effective combat force close to a potential battle area, which means this story is no longer about a dramatic deployment photo. It is about whether Washington is preparing to pay the operational price of staying close to the fight long after the first warning cycle passes. That price grows fast in a Gulf war. The C-17's mission completion success target is 92%, but even that standard sits on top of 20 maintenance man-hours per flying hour, while the wider regional battle space covered by US Fifth Fleet stretches across about 5 million square miles and 3 critical choke points. So every extra day of high-tempo movement increases the demand for fuel, spare parts, runway repair, convoy security, and protected unloading space. At that point, the burden is no longer measured by one aircraft carrying 170,900 pounds. It is measured by how many cycles the whole system can survive without slowing down. Colin Carl captured the strategic logic behind that burden when he said, "The opportunities to share early warning, integrate air defense capabilities, expand maritime domain awareness could not come at a better time." That line matters because once the deployment shifts from alert to endurance, the contest is no longer only about who can strike first. It becomes about who can keep the network alive, keep the corridor open, and keep combat power moving after the easy assumptions have already burned away. The final question is whether this alert remains a warning posture or becomes the opening infrastructure of a wider campaign. Once troops are moving by bus at night, Cargo chains are locking armored vehicles into a C-17, and commanders are feeding runway after runway with fuel, munitions, air defense teams, and maintenance crews. The meaning changes. This is no longer about one aircraft or one headline. It is about whether the United States is building enough depth to keep pressure on Iran across airfields, sea lanes, missile corridors, and regional bases at the same time. That is why the image of a transport ramp matters more than it seems. A C-17 can bring 102 troops, carry 170,900 pounds of cargo, operate from short or steer runways, and feed a combat system that stretches from Patriot batteries and fighter shelters to naval escorts, moving through 3 strategic choke points under U.S. Fifth Fleet oversight. If that flow continues, the real signal is not caution. It is that Washington is preparing for endurance, not theater. Air Force doctrine says the aircraft exists for the rapid strategic delivery of troops and all types of cargo to main operating bases or directly to forward bases, and that line explains the whole picture. The fire over the region may have triggered the crisis, but the airlift tells you what comes next. If the bridge keeps growing, this will not be remembered as the moment Tehran burned. It will be remembered as the moment the United States decided the war could no longer be contained by distance.